So please give a very warm welcome to Roger Williams. Roger is the writer and creator of many TV series. He's worked in, you can correct me as we go along as well, short film and in theatre, and some of us have just seen Gwledd, The Feast, his very first theatrical feature film. He has many, many credits and lots of things to tell us, so should we give him a round of applause? Yeah. Thank you very much for being here. So I'm going to start with like the easy, maybe it's an easy question. Do you remember the first thing in any screen format that made you inspired or consider like screenwriting as a craft? Like, because maybe that sort of comes a little bit later than just being amazed by films or TV, but do you remember the first thing that maybe you sort of thought about the writer behind it or the craft of making it?
Right, that's a very good question. No. I do remember being slightly obsessed with The Lady Killers,
right?
The Ealing comedy, because back in the day, and I always, kind of have this conversation with my son when he says things like, "Who was your favourite YouTuber when you were young?" And you kind of go, "Well, I had 4 channels, and I would watch pretty much everything that was on television, and The Lady Killers was one of those films that seemed to get repeated fairly frequently." So I remember being quite obsessed with The Lady Killers, and having seen it a few times, it becoming one of those pieces that you start to, not at the age when I was watching it, but you deconstruct, you can't help, but because it's so cleverly constructed as a piece of writing, that's when I first became aware, I think, of the nature of screenwriting. And that would have been when I was probably 12, 13, or that sort of age.
And I'm not an expert on that film, but I suppose it's the sense that you can sort of feel the sense of humour in the structure of it, the way everyone's kind of getting, all the criminals get slowly knocked off by accident. You can sort of feel like a humorous god sort of looking over that universe, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's very theatrical as well, and that's something that's always appealed to me. I think because like lots of people who start to write or people who go on to act, the first contact you have with drama, being involved with drama, is usually as a child or a young person when you're at school or you've joined some sort of drama group. So that theatrical influence is quite strong in the way that I think about drama, and it inevitably spills into everything that I write. I try and tame it. I try to stop it, but there's definitely a sense of theatre in Gwledd, The Feast, as well. But I think The Lady Killers is so satisfying as a piece of writing because it sets up the heist, delivers the heist, and then gives you this wonderful dose of morality, I guess, in that all the bad people get, sorry, spoiler, people who haven't seen it, all the bad people die, and the little old lady whose house they were using as their base to set up the heist walks away with a lolly, quite literally at the end, and her parrot is saying, "Where's the lolly?" But it is really well, like lots of those Ealing comedies actually, and a lot of that writing, it's really well conceived and carried out. Yeah.
I don't want to sort of miss the phrase of what was your favourite YouTuber when you were growing up as well, because that's there's so much meaning and information in that phrase and irony and everything. So you're raising writers as well.
Yeah, but it's interesting because he's only 12, but I guess because of my influence, probably he's a dab hand with an iPad, always has been, and now an iPhone. Don't give your children phones too young. It's not good. But he's making his own, doesn't realise it, but he's making his own stories. So he's learned how to use Premiere Pro and Blender and things like that, and he's creating stuff. He's not writing, in a conventional sense. But that creativity, you can see that creativity is at work in the same way as me, because I was one of those kids who, from a very young age, was interested in writing drama rather than short stories. So your teacher might say, right, you need to write something. You need to write a story about, this is the theme. And when I was writing short stories, there'd be an awful lot of dialogue in them. And I don't know where that came from, but as soon as I had that spark of inspiration from a really great drama teacher, you know, it was all about drama. The only creative writing I wanted to do was drama. I was even a bit obsessed with how it looked on the page. So
yeah, well, screenwriters often are, aren't they? Yeah. It's great for layout fans. So.
Yeah, but also it's, you know, there are many ways to lay out a film or a play or whatever it is you're writing. And quite often I just experiment because I think like, oh, I wonder what if I do it like this now. If I just try to write everything in short sentences, each stage direction, or you know, each direction is a separate line, and it's very short. And then I'll go to another project and it'll be like, no, paragraphs, big hefty paragraphs that describe the action, and what to include, what to omit. You know, they're all things that you grapple with, and you almost settle on what the text is going to look like on the page. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a really good answer for a question that wasn't even asked in a way, because like a lot of people when they're starting out, they can obsess about the format and doing it one way or another, or there's instructionals, but actually hearing that you do it.
It's comforting. Yeah. I find it comforting. I find like, you know, it anchors you in some sort of way, and often, I think lots of writers are like this, you'll spend an awful long time working on the first 2 or 3 pages because you need to ground whatever it is you're doing. Not only in terms of the idea and the character and in things like the tone of the stage directions. I find that when I'm writing something like The Feast compared to something which is more light-hearted, there is a different form of language that I use, and you kind of need to discover that. Yeah,
and it's the kind of sort of meta writing that you're doing, which is kind of conveying to the reader both what happens on the screen, but also
it's the tone.
Exactly.
It's the tone of what you're doing, and I'll obsess about describing characters, and because I think I come from theatre, where directors don't like, you know, like directors in theatre are like, no, don't tell me how to direct my play. Don't influence the actors too much by putting in stage directions. And then you go and work in film, and it's a generalization, but it's all about the directions. It's all about being able to describe really clearly and concisely what the viewer will receive.
Yeah, and with when you're saying with starting out and being driven towards drama straight away, was it you had a facility for dialogue, or was it also that you liked people performing your work as well, rather than it just being a kind of more of a solitary thing?
I think it was performance. Yeah. It's the performance, and also I like the collaboration. That's really, like, you know, there'll be writers who just go and write, and that is gospel. What's on the page is gospel, and it doesn't change, because you've sweated and you've worked hard over getting those words down onto the page. And I kind of think, well, go and write your novel, really, you know, go and do that. But I really enjoy working with directors and actors and designers. I find that, you know, I can't make film by myself. I can't, you know, in the days when I used to work in theatre, you wouldn't make a play by yourself. So you present people, which is, you know, as somebody said to me just this week, this stuff wouldn't exist if you didn't imagine it and write it. And you need to have the confidence to be able to take that to a team of people and entrust in them to turn it into something that will be watched. And I love that, because the life of a writer is very solitary anyway. But we've just made something. We just made something over the last few weeks. I'm kind of, I'd go onto set and I'd be exhausted within 2 or 3 hours, because it's like, what's all this activity? All these people talking at me. I'm not used to it. I don't like it. But actually, I love it.
It's nice that it's that kind of, especially because you work as a producer as well, it must be kind of a seasonal kind of life where you sort of go through the solitary periods and then it kind of gets busy and then it's quiet.
Yeah, my autumn is arriving now. You know, it's very much, because, you know, something you get asked a lot as well when you're writing is, what's next? And you're like, well, there are other things that I'm writing, but I haven't finished them yet. So it's, difficult to know what's going to be next. You know, like lots of writers, you're spinning plates because you tend to have more projects in your head than you can service. So, you know, you'll have something happening there and, you know, something happening in television, film, or whatever they might be. But I'm more than aware that I need to buckle down now and finish some stuff.
I mean, this is actually an intervention just to nudge you along. So you say you started out in theatre. What was, and it was really in those kind of teenage years. How did you start? And like, what was the first thing that you wrote or were asked to write, or how did your first kind of commission or project come in theatre? Or just an early one?
Yeah, well, it was like, you know, I say this to people, but I was writing drama when I was like 12, 13, 14. And I knew then that I wanted to be a writer. And that's weird, I know that's weird. But, you know, I just settled on, this is what I want to do. And I was determined, even though it came from a very conventional family. My parents were both teachers, and they were determined that I would be a teacher. You know, it was very much you will become a teacher, and you will. But I was determined that I was gonna work in TV and film, and that's the direction I was going to go in. And I was writing a lot of drama, and I'd write school assemblies and things. Right. You know, it was that kind of basic, really. And
what they put on?
Yeah. I once got told off for writing twat in a school assembly. Wow. Somebody turned around and said, "You twat." Not really understanding what the word was, you know, but kind of being one of those words that you heard around the place. And then things like the year of Eisteddfod, I'd write things that my friends would perform and we'd compete, and I would do all of that. And it comes back to that one drama teacher who said to me one day, and I've got a really clear memory of it, of her saying, after I'd written something, "Do you know what, this is really good." And that was enough, and it's testament to the impact teachers can have on our lives, that somebody just gives you that feedback, that positive feedback, and empowers you to think, oh, actually, I feel really good about myself, and I'm going to go and write something else. And I started to, with her actually, she started to send bits of my work off to competitions, and I got shortlisted for, I think it was a radio play competition. I got down to the last 20 in that. And then it was very much, okay, other people think that this stuff is okay. They think it's quite good. So that gave me permission to carry on and keep doing it. And work was kept sending bits off, and it's just some theatre companies in Cardiff who were doing workshops on new writing and working with young writers. And that first contact with the professional world came when I was about 16, probably 16, 17. And loved it, because again, it was about being in a room with actors and a director and having that dialogue about the work. You know, having somebody say, "This is interesting, but have you considered looking at it from this angle?" And suddenly those little bombs going off in my head, which is just really stimulating when you've got somebody who is a critical friend of your work. I think that's really important, I think, but when you're writing, to find those people who are going to be supportive of what you're doing. Because I don't know whether you've had this experience of handing a script over to somebody, and often, you know, you might hand it over and you never hear from them again, or you hand it over and you get a slating, or the worst thing they do is when they try to rewrite it for you. You know, and I still get that. So you'll hand over your 60 pages of your script and they come back and will go, "Yeah, it was really, really interesting." What I would do is I'd put the emphasis on the brother rather than the sister, and then rather than have the car crash on page 10, you know, I'd have them walking into a reservoir, and you walk away from those meetings thinking, that's not what I've written. So if you can find those people who are supportive of your vision, then hold on to them. And I've realised that through my career, that actually there will be a small, and it is a small number, it's a small number of people who have got those critical faculties to be able to read what you've done and give you honest feedback, but they're not trying to take ownership of it. And I worry that there are too many producers out there and script editors who do want to take ownership of the writer's work and therefore kind of diminish their voice, and unfortunately. So yeah, I've forgotten the question.
No, we were just talking about early starts, and I know it's really impressive that you got started so early as well. Did you then study at university, or did you study in, or did you do other things, or were you kind of...
I thought I was going to study creative writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think back about this. At the time, you don't know, do you? You know, I was probably a precocious 17-year-old applying to go to college and doing all of that. And people were telling me, creative writing, would you be better off just doing a degree in literature? You know, the sort of. And then I spoke to somebody I knew who was a writer, and they advised me. They said, don't do creative writing. Go away and do something else for 3 years, and come back to writing. And it was really good advice, actually. So I went away to Warwick University and did a degree in English and American literature. And I was still writing. You know, I was writing plays that the university drama society was putting on, and I was doing all of that. But I wasn't studying writing. So without realizing, I was exposing myself to all these other types of literature that I'd never read before, and all these novels and plays and poetry, and just collecting all these references and analysing and talking about literature. Yeah, all the while, you know, when I had downtime, I'd be going off and writing something for me that I try to get performed in some way. And left university. I was going to be a writer. I had all these people who were going to, you know, the jobs fairs, and were going on to do MAs, and were doing all of that sort of stuff, and going out to, and I just didn't know what I was. I'm going to write. Well, how? And one of the key moments was one of the people that I'd met when I was working as a young writer with theatres in Cardiff. A woman called Alison Hindle, who worked at BBC Radio Drama. She got in touch and said, we've got this scheme, we're going to do a residential course for a week on radio writing. Do you want to come along? And it's like, well, yeah, of course, yeah. A lot of things I've just stumbled into. Because when I first started working, when I first earned money as a playwright in Cardiff, my method to getting those commissions was I would phone up artistic directors. And people don't do that anymore, but you know, it's that coming from Carmarthen and not really having an understanding of how the industry works. I thought, well, if I wanted to have a job, if I wanted to get a job in Smith's or Woolworths, I would just get in touch and say, have you got any jobs? So I got a copy of the Artist and Writers Yearbook out of the library in Carmarthen, got the phone numbers of artistic directors of theatre companies and phoned them up. Said, hello, I'm a writer, I'm young, can I write something for you? And one of the artistic directors, who was fairly new in the post, said, come in and see me. And I left that meeting with a commission for a play.
Well done.
I think it's such an unusual thing to do that they probably kind of thought, well, let's take a punt. Let's take a punt. But yeah, I stumbled into things. So that invitation to go and spend a week in North Wales learning about radio writing was, why not? Yeah, let's go and do that. And I hadn't really thought of radio before. I know we're going to talk about writing for the big screen specifically, but being somebody who's started out very much seeing drama as an activity or a story that's told on a stage. There was this learning curve that I went on to, oh, right, I could tell the same story that I would tell on stage, but I've got to tell it in a very different way. How do you marry the idea and the medium? And what is successful about the medium? What are the tools that are unique to the medium of writing for radio? And I've done that constantly, and I've been aware of that throughout my career because it's, as you've said, it's encompassed theatre, television, radio and film, but then within things like television you've got very different types of writing as well. So you know, you've got your kind of high-end drama, which I've done, you've got your soap, which I've done, you've got your writing for children, which I've done, and it's about kind of, not everybody wants to do all those things, I know, but I've got this policy of trying everything once, I think. But so you adapt the way that you write to suit those different mediums.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously you've worked in all those mediums. Have you found that both as you're starting out and as your career has continued, have you found that your peers have also done that? Are there people that you maybe encountered in radio that moved into TV or theatre into film, or do you find, is it that porous for everybody, or are you unusual in that case? Do you find that?
I think it's very common in the Welsh world.
Right.
It's very common for people to move across from theatre to telly and back and forth. And I think a lot of writers do it, but not everybody. You know, there are certain people I could name who very much see themselves as theatre writers. Yeah. And they might have dipped their toe into something else, but it's not for them. And I found myself that actually where I want to be shifts. So currently I very much want to be thinking in terms of film. That's what I want to pursue. And trying to make opportunities happen in that space. But you might get pulled back to do something for television. But that's the great thing, isn't it, about writing, is you can sort of decide where you want to place your project. And you might say, actually, this project is better suited for cinema. Or you might just have that understanding of where it fits, and also the opportunity, because as we know, getting a feature film off the ground is tough. It's really, really difficult. So with some things you might think, well, actually, with adaptation, this will work better for television. And you just need to be aware of that and be aware of the market and what people are looking for.
Yeah. And when you started out writing and sort of sending people, did you learn things like format and ideas about structure and acts and stuff like that? Is that something that you would study in a formal way, or is that something more that you kind of learn by intuition and experience?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of just osmosis. So, and osmosis and learning and listening and watching. I think it's really one of the downsides of writing is when I watch something, yeah, I can't help but analyze it while I'm watching it and going, oh, that's an interesting turn that is taken there. Why have they done that? And so I can't purely enjoy something that I watch anymore. I do enjoy stuff, yeah, but it is, and my partner kind of turns to me because we'll watch something and my partner will say, oh, that was great, that was brilliant, wasn't it? And then there's a silence and it's, well, I wasn't sure about the end. And then I get this, why are you ruining it? Why are you spoiling everything? But it's something that I can't help do anymore because that's, my brain, for better or worse, has been hardwired to think about writing. And yes, we've got beautiful design and fantastic camera work. Although if anybody says to me again about a TV series or whatever, oh, well, it looked good, didn't it? I kind of I want to scream because, I kind of think, well, let's talk about the story, let's talk about the character, because that's what it's about. And that's what underpins all of that stuff, yeah, for me. Again, it goes back to what I was told earlier this week, nothing happens without the script. That's the foundation of everything, isn't it, that we do. And we need to remember that as writers, because we are, I think we get, unfortunately, I think as the process goes on, our role in it can be diminished. Yeah. We need to remember, actually, it's a really powerful thing that we do when we hand over a script to people, because that is the seed of everything that follows. But yeah, I've never really studied. I've just watched as much stuff as I can, and yeah, that part of my brain analyses and deconstructs and has an opinion on it.
Yeah, that's the trade-off, isn't it? I was watching something, it doesn't happen all the time, but I watched the other day, it was like, oh, it's a very satisfying end to Act 2. And you're like, that's not how you should be maybe watching things. So, if I was wrong, was that a question or?
No, I'm scratching my head.
That's fine, I'm sorry to pick on you, but I hope you're feeling okay. Oh yes, there we go.
So just going back to things that you have watched then, is there anything that you watched really, really liked and could recommend from a writing point of view?
Oh, that's a horrible question.
Because top 3 or something.
Because I watch stuff and I also forget about it, and I dump it. I'll come back to you on that. I'll have to think. There's nothing I've seen recently, which is why there's lots of stuff I enjoy. Like there's a TV series called The Bear. Have people seen The Bear?
I haven't seen it.
It's on Disney Plus, and it's this guy. He's a chef, and he inherits his brother's restaurant, and he goes to run it, following his brother's death. And I'd read about it, and I was, this is intriguing. And there's a lot to really like about it. But again, it's hype, isn't it? So much stuff gets hyped these days, and you get drawn to it. And it was one of those ones where, after watching 8 episodes, I turned to my partner and went, wasn't sure about the end. Yeah, it was one of those. But I'll try and remember. I'll try and think up some. I'll try and think of a good answer to your question.
You've introduced a very exciting new plot thread into our drama, and we'll pay it off.
Is it going to pay off?
Yeah.
Or is it going to be a bit,
yeah, well,
didn't like the answer.
Yeah. Most of it was good. It looked great. So, so how did you transition into, especially being a paid writer for screen? I think it was TV first. So how did that come about, especially?
Oh, so much of it is luck,
right,
and so much of it is accident. It's amazing. I mean, you've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to convince, and you've got to have something to say, which is like, you know, kind of marks you out as a person that's of interest, I guess, to producers and commissioners and all the rest of it. But there are so many people out there writing really good stuff, and they don't get their stuff made. You know, it's a cliche, I know, but it is kind of being in the right place at the right time. And I'd been doing my theatre thing in Cardiff in the late 90s, and I went off to, I do this, I kind of blow things up occasionally. So I was establishing myself in Cardiff, and I was kind of working pretty much all the time in theatre. And I decided, I'm going to go and live in Australia. There was a scheme at the time called New Wales in New South Wales, and it was like this arts thing, and I went to be a playwright in residence at Sydney Theatre Company, and I had a great time. It was meant to be a stint of 3 months, and it turned into a stint of almost a year. It was great. And of course, I came back then. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a flat anymore in Cardiff, and I ended up living back with my parents at their home in Carmarthen, and having a part-time job at a Waterstones in Carmarthen over Christmas. And I was in the box room where I would unpack all the books and scan them into the machine, and it was just like, it was glamorous, I tell you.
But that's the step that took you into professional TV writing.
Yeah, because I was there working there, and there was a TV company from London who were looking for a writer to write a drama series for them. And this is interesting. This is kind of insight into how television producers can work, whereas we often think that we will write something and take it to television producers. It's not uncommon for television producers to come looking for somebody, and they'd been developing a drama series called Tales from Pleasure Beach, and it was kind of like a series of single dramas set in Porthcawl and loosely based around the caravan park and the fun fair in Porthcawl. And they'd worked with a couple of writers, and in their words, the producers' words, it didn't work out, which meant really that the writers weren't writing what the producers wanted them to write. And somebody'd recommended me, and they'd read some of my stuff, and they offered me this job. And I kind of wandered into it going, yeah, great, that's, you know, kind of, yeah, no, I'll meet you, and I started to write the scripts, and they kind of liked what I was doing. And I'm unusual a little in a way, because I'm able to interpret what producers and directors want, and I don't mind adapting the work. Yeah. It's this idea of collaboration that I spoke about earlier, really, because I acknowledge that it's going to take an army of people to make something. So you would be foolish not to listen to what other people are telling you. Being able to cipher it out then, really, and keep the best bits of what you're being told, reshape it, recraft it, and make it work. So that was good, that was working, and they got the commission. And suddenly I had a drama series on BBC Two Network, which got nominated for a BAFTA, alongside shows like Clocking Off and At Home with the Braithwaites, for anybody who's old enough to remember those. Yeah, I found myself at this awards ceremony in London for the BAFTAs, thinking, oh, it's always going to be like this. That was my first taste of TV, and of course it's not like that. Right. And you kind of wish, afterwards you just think, I wish I'd made more of that opportunity. But it got me an agent, you know, and it kind of established me as somebody who could write telly. And then it was back to, blank page, what's next? And rebuilding and coming up with ideas that other people would want to take on. That's the sad thing, isn't it? You know, you get something made, and then you have the whole fanfare of, it's out, it's available to watch, go and see it, or it's on telly at 9 o'clock on Tuesday. And then something else is on at 9 o'clock next Tuesday, and again, and you have to go away and create something new to keep yourself working, but also to keep yourself relevant and visible.
And have you largely, on the projects you worked on, have they been majority originals, or, I mean, like that first one you had a brief from the producers, yeah. But have you generally been working with things that you've initiated versus working for any other voices or other collaboration with other projects? The writers.
Early on, I think. Early on, it was a combination of my own ideas and also people bringing ideas to the table. And also very early on, I spent a year. I don't know how I managed a year, but I spent a year working on Hollyoaks, right. Which is, you know, it's a school where you learn to write in a certain way, and you learn a lot about story, but it's also really competitive, because they put 30 plus writers in a room together to compete to be able to write 15 episodes. They do them in 15 episode blocks. So you go in and you pitch stories and you talk about stories and you break the stories down, and then the stories that are the most successful are the ones that get told, and the people who have been responsible for pitching those stories are the ones who get the work. So I did things like that, you know, which is a very, very specific type of writing, yeah. Which ultimately I didn't really find very satisfying. But did things like that, and then worked in writers' rooms on shows for CBBC and other places, which were other people's ideas. But I think in the last 10 years or so, it's been original work. Yeah. And I think you just get, you know, I'm older, obviously, and it's the great thing is you become more confident about what you're doing. And you find yourself being the same age or slightly older than the people who are commissioning the work. So, you know, you find yourself in meetings kind of saying, this will be really good. And you think, like, I'm winging it now, I'm winging it, I'm trying to convince them. But they're believing me. Yeah. Because I've got background and history and I've got a certain reputation. But I know I'm really lucky to be able to tell the stories that I want to tell.
Sure. And when you are starting an original project, do you find, maybe it's different, like you say, different format, different styles, do you find that you start out with one thing in particular? Do you start out with a character or a location, or do you have a theme in advance, or is the theme something you kind of discover as you go along? what do you find with like common starting points, or an image maybe? I don't know. So.
Yeah, I would say that by now it's almost like trying to solve a problem. So I created a drama series called Bang for SLC, which was a crime drama series set in Port Talbot, and that was born out of a situation where the drama commissioner had said to me that she only wanted to commission crime drama for the next 3 years. And I just had a successful project on with them, which had won awards, and but it was like a family saga. It wasn't a crime drama. So it was like, right, well, if I'm going to do any work here in this space for the next 3 years, I need to start thinking about crime. And that became the challenge. It's like the gauntlet has been thrown down. Can Roger Williams write a crime drama series? Yeah. And I like that. I like that challenge of shaping something and creating something and delivering it, and then have somebody go, actually, I like this. This is quite good. And it just feels really focused, and it feels like it has purpose to work in that way. Because I don't think I could do anything, you know, in terms of like career and things. I've got to a certain age now where I don't think I could do anything else. I could probably, you know, I can make coffee with the best of them, but yeah, it just feels like, well, I need to keep creating in order to be able to put food on the table and to live. And I like that challenge. So the challenge with Bang was how do I write a crime drama when I like crime drama, but it's almost become a parody of itself.
And there's a lot of it as well. So
there's a lot of it, and there's a reason why there's a lot of it as well, because audiences love it. My way into it was to make it character driven. So basically it was a man in his early 20s who feels as though his life is stuck. He has no ambition. He's in a job working at like an Amazon packing factory, and he comes into possession of a gun, and that gun empowers him, and he starts to behave in a different way, and that is married to the discovery of a dead body and the realization that the gun that shot the man is the gun that is now in his possession. And his sister is a policewoman. Yeah. So it's about family, it's about somebody doing something which is completely out of character, and telling the story from that point of view, rather than it being about a detective. Yeah. You know, this is not Inspector Morse or something, you know, it's not going at it from the way that you would expect to go at it, and also then deciding very much that it's going to be set in Port Talbot. I think location is really important to the way that I write at the moment. It's like giving a project an identity, yeah. Because while things have been shot in Port Talbot before, I wasn't really aware of projects that had used Port Talbot as Port Talbot, and it's such, you know, on the screen it just looks amazing. You know, Aberavon Beach, the steelworks, the mountains, the M4 that goes over the town. Yeah. You know, it's so much. Yeah, but there's so much opportunity to use that place in interesting ways, and it hasn't been exposed that much either. That then became a part of it, and you find yourself, which is why I think I ended up producing, because you start to go, right, okay, what's going to make this project interesting and saleable and different? Whereas if I just had an idea about a man who comes into possession of a gun and he shouldn't really have a gun, that's fine, yeah. But being able to reinforce my idea with, yeah, location, and this is how we're going to use the location, and spending time in Port Talbot and realising, you know, the different spaces that you can use and reflecting those back in the work. It's a big part of my brain now, is not being able to write without thinking about how it's going to sit in the marketplace or when it's looked at by commissioners. Yeah. And I think I encourage everyone to do that. I used to be chair of the Writers Guild of Great Britain, and I always used to say to people, yeah, you're writers, but you're also business people. You know, you've got IP that you are selling in the marketplace. So in order to be able to sell that to producers or commissioners, you need to be as canny as you can about understanding what the audience for that work is, what space that work is going to sit in, what that film is kind of similar to, what the comparables are, and being able to talk about it in those ways, which shows you've got kind of a real understanding of the commercial nature of what you're doing. It's not solely artistic.
Yeah, I'm just going to check if because I'm not looking at it.
Question.
Yeah.
You're talking about basing the drama on character, crime drama, and you do film as well, obviously. I've often heard writers say sometimes they prefer TV because they get more time to develop character. Do you find a big difference in how you approach character development between a movie and say TV or theatre, and where do you know the changeover is, or can you just speed it up and go more plot instead of character?
Yeah.
How do you get that balance?
Yeah, I think I've just had that on a project, on the next project that we just finished filming, where it was an idea that could have been a TV series. And we decided to go, no, it's the story is better told as a film. Just felt like to tell that story over, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours was the best form for it, rather than going down the road of, you know, yes, it's 4 hours or it's 6 hours. But an instinctive thing for me now. But you're right, because doing your 6 hours or your 8 hours gives you more time, more space to be able to develop those characters and to tell those stories. But I think I'm constantly asking, you know, there's that, once I know what something is, it's like, why do it as television? Why do it as film? I think you develop a sense for knowing where things sit and what the best medium is for them. Television audiences are clever, really clever, because there's so much content out there, and people are so used to moving from Netflix to BBC to ITV back to something like that's on Amazon. They generally don't waste their time on something which doesn't grab them, and you have to feed the television series. You know, it has to be plenty of material, plenty of content, plenty of character development, and it's knowing that you've got enough inspiration to be able to do that and tell it over 8 hours, or indeed, you know, like the American shows, they'll go for 5 seasons, 6 seasons, 7 seasons. And I think the reason they're so good is that they're generally written by a room of writers. You know, we in the UK, we haven't really gone there in the same way, where you'll have, you know, Russell T Davies writing every episode of It's a Sin, and as good as it was, you know, it was a limited series. But if the Americans were to do something similar, it would probably be at least 10, and then it would come back, and it would return. So it's just what you're comfortable with, really, and, you know, kind of something I do as well, which I didn't do when I started out, is I never really talk to people about a new idea until I know absolutely what it is. I think I get this when friends of mine bring ideas to me, or somebody tries to pitch something to me. They'll say, I've got this idea, it's about a man who lives in a cottage, and he wakes up one morning, he looks out the window, and there is a strange woman standing in the garden, and she smiles at him, and then they get to know each other, and then they end up knocking somebody down in their car, or whatever it is. You go, okay, it's an interesting opening. What happens then? Oh, I don't know. It's just, but it's about their relationship and how it develops. And you'll be, right, okay, so you haven't, yeah, no, I was hoping you could help me with that. I was hoping you could, and through having, yeah, and through having those conversations, you actually go, oh shit, I do that, don't I? I go off and I tell people my idea, and they must think, what a loser, because you haven't worked it out. You don't really know what it is. So it's hard to do, but I try with stuff that I haven't worked out for myself yet, just to be quiet about it, or to go to those critical friends that I talked about earlier, you know, who will help me talk it through. But I'd never take something to a producer anymore or a commissioner that I didn't have a really strong handle on, because you know that if you do that and they've got questions or they're confused, you've blown it. You've blown that opportunity. So if you can, it's best to just like sit on things until you've really been able to solve some of the problems and worked out what the beginning, the middle and the end is.
Great advice. Talking about genre and marketplace and things like that, I know that I've heard you talk at other events about how the Feast of Gwledd was very much intended to be for the theatrical release, and also firmly within the horror genre. That was a sort of conscious decision, wasn't it? So was that, do you find, how did that go for you, but also in terms of, it sounds like you're someone who can find a way to make things personal. So it's never just a sort of an empty exercise. When you make a crime drama, you're making a crime drama that you can feel invested in. And same with Gwledd. Was that something you found easy to make personal and easy to be invested in? Was that? Yeah.
I'd wanted to make a film for a long time. I'd wanted to make a cinematic release for a long time. And you probably remember a project that I had called Maldod. Do you remember that? And the first cinematic? Do you remember that? Yeah. This was kind of like 2013, 2014 maybe. And Lee and I were working together and we were like, yeah, we're going to make a film. We've made loads of TV. How hard can a film be? We can make a film. Turns out it's really hard. And I talked about that experience of writing for radio for the first time. The big penny drop moment for me came when I was working on this project called Maldod and realised I've written something which is televisual. And I didn't really, at that time, if I'm completely honest, understand the difference between cinematic and televisual. Sounds really naive. I think I probably just thought it's on a big, one's on a big screen, one's on a small screen. I set out, this problem-solving pattern that I've got, I set out to go, well, what is cinematic? What does that mean? And you'll Google it and you'll get hundreds of different responses, because the truth is I think we've all got our own understanding of what makes something cinema or not. And for me it was going to watch a lot of films and sitting there and realising what am I feeling, how is my brain working in this space that's different to when I watch something on television. So again, analysing, deconstructing, not really enjoying what I'm watching. And it was me understanding that the experience of watching a piece of work in the cinema is more like going to an art gallery. That's how I describe it to people, in that, you know, you've paid your £7 to get in, you've committed to sitting there for 2 hours, your phone is off, and you are looking at the image, and you are listening to the sound, and you are interpreting it. And cinematic for me then was what you as a writer or a director choose to reveal, and when you choose to reveal it. And particularly in The Feast, I think there is a lot of ambiguity, there is a lot of space around certain moments and certain ideas, where I hope the audience are trying to fill in the blanks and trying to interpret what's going on. And as soon as I had that epiphany, which is my epiphany, and it'll be different to yours, and it'll be different to yours and yours and yours, I went, actually, I think I know how to write this now. I think I know how to write it. So it's that delicate balance between it being, you being quite explicit about what can be seen, but at the same time, what is unseen or what isn't revealed on the page.
I also noticed I was watching your short film Want It, which you made with Lee as well a few years ago.
Yeah.
And I was noticing between that and the Feast as well, was that for someone who started out with a passion for dialogue, you've actually got very confident and comfortable writing dialogue-free sequences for quite extended periods as well. And so, not that that's necessarily more or less cinematic, but is that something you've noticed yourself doing or being more comfortable doing as well?
Yeah. I think for somebody who I mentioned earlier when I was a school kid, you know, it was all about the dialogue. I've got to a place now where actually dialogue, it's hard, isn't it? And actors are always so critical of dialogue as well. Yeah. Had that on the last job, you know, actors rewriting bits of dialogue because it's like, I wouldn't say this. Yeah, no, there is I take a certain pleasure, I think, now, and I know what it is. It's about the action. It's watching actors do things. So in The Feast, you know, there's that long sequence, 6 minutes, I think, 6.5 minutes, where, you know, nobody speaks. And there's just something about the actions within that which I was having pleasure writing and imagining this weird family, you know, who've all got their addictions, and they've all got their, you know, their afflictions as well, I think, actually. Just watching them living in this house together and behaving in slightly strange ways. There was a pleasure in revealing that to the audience and being able to do that, because there was no need for anybody to speak, because this family doesn't really communicate either.
Yeah, so again, it's finding the right shape and the right form.
Yeah.
I'm very glad this has been in dialogue format. Yes, we'll finish with questions. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for doing this. I was just wondering maybe the details of your collaboration with Lee while you were making The Feast, because I know you worked together previously up in television. It sounds like it took a while for it to get made. So would you write independently and show him some things, or would he have any input in terms of the story or characters or anything? I'm just in terms of that collaboration.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I talk about critical friends really, and Lee is one of those. Say I've got like 4 of them, you know. He is one of them because he's a clever man. You know, he's able to read and give really good feedback on what he's read. And we've reached a place in our collaboration where we talk a lot before I write anything. So the challenge with The Feast was, because pretty much we were invited to pitch to make a Welsh language film. So then this business of problem solving is, how do we make a successful Welsh language film? And we talked around that for a long time, because being aware that it's hard to make a film anyway, and in order to get a film out into the market which isn't in the English language is even harder. So it's like, how do we give the film its best chance? And it was through those conversations that we decided to go down the genre route and make a horror film. And luckily we both had similar experiences when we were teenagers of watching films late at night that we probably shouldn't have been watching, you know, kind of slasher flicks. And, you know, I was a big Hitchcock fan as well, you know, so there's those sorts of influences in it. A film that was saying something. So I think I mentioned It Follows earlier, and films like Get Out and things, you know, that there's some sort of social commentary within it. And then from his point of view, we did have a lot of conversations about, you know, how it was going to look. Because the aesthetic, this is like an obvious thing to say really, but the aesthetic is incredibly important. It's kind of testament to why the film is so successful, I think, because, you know, it is shot in such a beautiful way, and discovering that location was key. And even that location, you know, because we knew that we'd be making the film with not very much money. So I was writing it so that the majority of the film happened in one location. Because if we'd had 10 locations, you've got 10 location fees, and you've got to dress the house 10 times, or the location 10 times, and you've got to move from the different locations, and that all eats up time, so you've got less time to be shooting. So we believe it or not, talked about all these things before I wrote a word. And then I went away. We've both got this interest in the individual's relationship to place, which is something that we've worked in, exists in other projects that we've made together. So the horror film became a prism for us to tell a story through, which was about, you know, our relationship to land and heritage. I wrote and I showed him the script, and then he comes back with notes and we talk again, and I wrote another draft. I didn't do very many drafts of it. It's one of those, you get this occasionally where you write something and people don't want to interfere with it. And that's brilliant. Like, you know, people, directors, producers, they love to get their fingerprints all over what you're doing. But this is one of those few projects where people had useful things, and I would rewrite based on what they'd said. And then when we found the location, I rewrote, because we wanted to make sure that it's absolutely suited the place that we were filming in. But yeah, we talk a lot, you know, and he doesn't want to write. You know, he's tried, he doesn't like it. So we've got this healthy balance, I think, and when we go into the edit, then, you know, I become his critical friend. So I go into the edit and, you know, I'll be, yeah, I think we stay too long on that shot at the end. I think we should maybe see more of her in that moment rather than him, you know, and then that's the payback, really.
Yeah. I think we have a couple of questions. Yes?
I was so interested that you come from Martha, because I immediately thought of Merlin when she was asleep under the hill and everything. But do you think that Wales lends itself to horror?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the conversations we had early on when Lee and I were talking about the film was the Mabinogion. And there, you know, it started with us kind of thinking, well, how do we use these Welsh stories, which are very bloody, you know, and horrific in lots of ways? How do we fold them into what we're doing? I'm surprised really that nobody has taken the Mabinogion. People have over the years made things based on the Mabinogion, but I think that we have a lot of cultural references that do fit the horror genre, they're in this, but in very subtle ways. So absolutely, when she goes out and lies in the grass and rolls around, you know, there's a touch of Blodeuwedd and things in that, and there's a very subtle, the sound of the owl in certain places, which people don't pick up on, but it entertains us because those were the conversations that we were having early on.
And if you stick around, there's an incredible Welsh horror season going on in chapter, so just stay this weekend. Prove the point. And when we watch it again, the owl will all. And there's a question there.
Yes. So the thesis of film, like the sound is very important, the visuals are very important. How do you find as a writer, like, because you have your creative vision, how the film should look like and should sound like? How do you translate those ideas to kind of like, without telling the people how to do their jobs, what do you think the film should look like and sound like? You know?
Yeah.
So, you know, that's in the culture of sound media, right?
Yeah. I just think you have that, you know, they're doing the project because they're responding to what you've written. You won't really find you won't really find a director of photography taking a job just because, oh, you know, it's 3 weeks in mid Wales working 10-hour days, you know, it's like they really want to do it. So that spirit of collaboration, and I think as long as you speak up and talk about your ideas, that if you're working with the right people, they will listen to what you say. But I also think make sure it's on the page as well. And I'm really pleased you mentioned sound, because that was a light bulb moment that I had in the process of putting the project together, was when somebody said in this room, in a session for people who wanted to make their first features, they said, don't forget that sound can be cinematic as well. And that was a moment where my brain went, because you think of cinematic being visual only. So all the way through this process, we were talking about sound. You know, it's no accident that the film opens with that drill and that horrible, horrible sound, you know, which is meant to set everyone on edge. And why I love it when people actually see the films in the film in cinemas, because you won't get that experience when you're watching it at home on TV. You know, it's deliberately there for the cinematic experience, and all the way through. I could give you examples of that where sound is written in. It's written into it, and then we worked with Sam Sim, the composer, who like completely got it, you know, and was able to play with those pictures and put music to them, which just enhances what we're seeing. And a sound mixer who lives in Cardiff, who again completely understood what we were doing, there were lots of flies in the film. Did you see the flies? Because we were filming in rural Powys in the height of summer, and we couldn't get these flies out of the house. So in the end, we were like, well, let's just use them, really. And the sound designer was putting in the sound of flies buzzing around and things like that. But that's through collaboration, really, and working with people that respect you and you respect them and you can trust. But I think your power as a writer is to be able to make sure it's on the page. So you're imagining what you see, but you're also imagining what you hear.
Great power. I think we may make this the last question, maybe, so thank you.
So we've probably, every one of us here probably got a script or a draw somewhere. And it's gone through drafts probably, and had the critical friends thing. But what's the next step for that? Like, is it competitions, is it screenwriting things like festivals, or is it like, how do you pitch them? Is it pitching? Does it depend? Any advice on that?
I think it's really hard. I think it's if you're starting out, if you haven't had anything made, or even if you've had something made and you're going for your secondary, it's always hard. You know, it's even though I've made stuff, it's still hard. You know, I still get no, still, you know, and that's normal, and I shouldn't expect it to be any other way. And there was a period last year where I wasn't sure. I was actually like, oh God, am I gonna get to make anything again? Should I be listening to my parents and going off to do that PGCE finally? Because it grinds you down. Even when you have established yourself, it grinds you down. And I hear people talk about agents a lot, and they go, I need to get an agent, I need to get an agent. But for me, you know, I would think about the producers that you admire. So just think about those films that you really like. If you are, and I'll talk about just film for now, but the same thing obviously applies for TV or whatever whatever medium you're writing for. Just think about the stuff you like, find out who the producers are, and target them, because it'll just save you a lot of time. Because you might think, well, right, okay, I'm going to go to a production company in Cardiff, for example, and you might send your script out to some of them, and they're probably not the best people to be making what you want to make. You know, especially in film, unfortunately. I think there are so few film producers based in Wales. That's why I think it's hard. I think in terms of film, you know, you might be better suited looking towards London to find film producers. There are some very good ones in Wales, but you know, because there are so few, they're busy on their own projects and it's difficult to get a hearing. So I just think do the research about who you're going to target, stalk them, and try and get that script in front of them. Truth is, they probably don't want to read all of your script. So you think how long it would take you to read somebody else's script in this room. it's going to be an investment of, what, 3 hours of your life probably by the time you stopped halfway and had a cup of tea and answered the door to the Amazon driver, and you know, you've done all that sort of stuff. So you might want to just send 1 page initially, or even a paragraph.
Yeah, a paragraph prep treatment.
And that actually is a really good discipline. You know, if you are able to distill your idea down into a paragraph, it shows that you've got a really clear understanding of what it is you're working. You know, that's something that is a good exercise anyway. When we were doing Bang, I got to a point where there was a document that was 48 pages long, which told the whole story. And then I took it down to a document of 10 pages, document of 3 pages, a page, a paragraph, and then it became a crime drama about a brother, a sister, and a gun. And that's all it became. You know, and you think, God, I've spent weeks thinking about this and writing this, but people don't want to know, really. Like, the majority of people don't want to know. If you can hook them with, you know, this is a horror film about the spirit of a witch who's been buried underground for centuries, and she comes alive and, you know, avenges, you know, or takes revenge on a family for what they've done to her burial ground, or whatever, you know, your interpretation of the feast is. You can hook them with that. They'll go, can I see that? Yeah. Because you know, which is why I try to make people just that awareness of how producers work and think. They're going, horror, great, because we can make horror, we can get that off the ground. They're going, I haven't seen that before. They're going, environmental themes, great. And they will say to you, can I read your script? And then you make sure that you get a meeting. They send your script, can I come up to meet you? And it's what the gentleman said there, you know, you're starting to form a relationship. Because they don't know who you are. You know, it's me phoning up artistic directors and going, you know, can I write you a play? It's about establishing those relationships and just being really nice as well, I think, you know. It's just because they want to work with people who aren't going to be a problem. They're going to want to make work with people who aren't going to be cropping up on set every other day going, no, don't say it like that! I didn't write it like that! You know? So build those relationships, which is hard, right? You know, I find it hard enough to have relationships with my own friends, you know, but to actually create new relationships then is tough. But that is the best way of getting your stuff made. And don't get disheartened, you know, when people turn around and go like, oh, no, because, yeah, people will keep saying no for sometimes very valid reasons. Because they've got, you know, they need to earn a living and they've only got a finite amount of time to be able to deal with things. But if the idea is good enough, I am a strong believer, if the idea is good enough, somebody will identify that it's good and will try and get it made, definitely.
I mean, we're talking to you today, I think it's been clear that you're someone who does his research and is open to lucky opportunity and is proactive and also very nice. So these are all very positive things. Thank you all very much for coming, thank you for being here, and thank you for your questions. Let's give ourselves a round of applause.